All right, everyone. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Nigel Cook from the School of Vet Med at UW-Madison. So he's a professor in the Food Animal Production Medicine section of the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Veterinary Medicine. He qualified as veterinary in 1992 and worked in a large, well, I say 1982 because I was born 1982. So 1992 and worked in a large food animal clinic in southern England for 4 years before moving to the Royal Veterinary College, Hertfordshire, where he spent 3 years as lecturer and head of the large animal ambulatory clinic. Since 1999, he has been in Wisconsin teaching veterinary students, performing research, and developing outreach to improve dairy cattle well-being. His particular interests include lameness prevention, cow comfort, and improving facility design. He's currently chair of the Department of Medical Sciences and my boss, past president of the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, and was awarded the Wisconsin Veterinary Medical Association Veterinary of the Year of 2019 and the American Association of Bovine Practitioners Award of Excellence in 2021. With that, thank you, Dr. Nigel Cook, for being here with us.
Thank you so much. I know you have a choice and breakout session, so I thank you for flying with me. We're going to talk about managing culling in dairy herds one cow at a time, and the latter part of that title will become meaningful later on in this presentation.
And by the way, this is they probably saw Dr. Mike Overton, Dr. Steve LeBlanc, so it's a combined theme.
I sense a theme. Yeah, I sense that. There's been multiple discussions about culling, records, replacements. So I get your idea. That's all on him. Okay? So if you don't like it,
yeah, blame on you.
I'm just doing his bidding here. So I kind of, I'm from the UK when the UK was part of Europe. Not anymore, but I have a European perspective, if you like, from those years. And there was an awful lot of talk about productive life in Europe for a long time, with an emphasis on the importance of longevity, of an early first calving and a long productive life. Nice kind of layout here. And those life expectancy concerns come from some basic math that we generally calve our cows at around 2 years of age. Average lifespans based on our typical turnover rates are around 2.5 to 4 years in progressive dairy industries. That makes an average total lifespan of about 4.5 to 6 years compared to what we believe cows can live to, around 20 years. And so even though we may find within herd lifespans of 1 to 10 or more years, the average lifespan of our dairy cows is relatively short. I'm going to use the terminology that John Fetro published way back 2006. They tried to standardize some of our I might just give up and go for here. We're going to talk about herd turnover rate. That is defined as the total population of lactation 1 plus cows, so first lactation all the way up through, divided by the average number of those cows in the herd, typically over a 12-month period. And we're not adding cull cows back in to the denominator, importantly. In some jurisdictions, that was taking place. So average productive life is basically 100 divided by the turnover rate, again emphasizing the average. John emphasized that there were 3 possible destinations for cull cows: death, slaughter or salvage, and dairy sales. Dairy sales being defined as moving a cow to continue her career milking on another farm. So those are the basics that we're going to be using. But when I go to Europe, again, this is what I hear. Cows need the last 5 lactations. I'm actually doing a meeting in France next month. This is the whole theme of the entire seminar. I'm giving this talk, so how popular will I be? So that 5 lactations is going to really mean that the herd average turnover rate is 20%. So again, on average. So to quote Dr. Overton, who's in the room, when performed appropriately, culling is the process of improving the herd by replacement. Totally in agreement with that statement. And other people will argue that improving herd longevity is also good. Longer lives result from healthier cows, and that reflects better animal welfare. Decreased environmental footprint, raising fewer replacements, can decrease our methane emissions per kilo or pound of milk, and we can improve the economics because we're keeping cows longer. And remember the old story that they're paying off their rearing dues from that. Problem is, when you look at actual data, we're going to punch a few holes in that discussion. This is a cluster analysis we did at Wisconsin Dairies a number of years ago, clustering herds by 16 different DHI variables into groups with similar outcomes. So there's group 1 here with relatively high performance. And if you look at the turnover rate, not the lowest turnover rates by any means globally, but relatively low for the US, about 33%. And these herds are great. 3x milking, lots of milk, good fertility, excellent transition cow performance, great udder health, doing an awful lot of things well. Equally, I can go over here and find another group of herds that have even lower turnover rate, 32.6%, but you'll notice a lot of red numbers. These herds aren't doing very well. They're lower milk production, poor fresh cow health, poor udder health. There's a lot of bad things going on, even though they also have a low turnover rate. And yet we can come to group 6 here, the largest of the herds, where we've got the highest average turnover rates, and yet these herds are actually doing quite well. Good milk production, good fertility, good performance. And so when you actually look at the real herd situation, there are herds with lower turnover rates, with great welfare, excellent health. They sell heifers or build another barn, they expand. But there are also herds with lower turnover rates that have low turnover rates because they have to keep cows. And those cows may be high cell count cows, mastitic cows, lame cows, and that impacts their overall performance and fertility and their ability to breed replacements. Equally, there are herds with high turnover rates that can support those higher turnover rates because of good health and good fertility and have the replacement supply they need to do it. Sweden, the mecca of animal welfare. This is a dramatic paper, 2023, I think. The relative short longevity of dairy cows in Sweden is not the result of problems with health and welfare. Who knew? Rather, it hinges on farmers' investment decisions, farm-specific characteristics, and animal management practices. That's a big admission for Sweden. Turnover rate is a poor indicator of welfare. Just put it aside. If you've got lots of sick cows, you can actually improve animal welfare by getting rid of them. That's not really what we're talking about. If we examine the environmental footprint, we hear, oh yeah, you're keeping more replacements, your environmental footprint's going to be worse, and replacements can be 20 to 33% of herd methane emissions. So, on a basis, a fifth to a third of the emissions may be coming from the replacement supply. But the reality is, when we look at what we're trying to argue, average turnover rates versus lower turnover rates, we're really in this 24-month first calving group. We're looking down here at really culling rates between 35 and 25 in this example. And that difference there in methane emissions from the herd is 6%. We're arguing about reducing methane emissions from the herd by 6% between these different arguments for turnover and productive life. Turns out that the best thing you can do is get the cow to survive one lactation. So a lot of the improvements you see in emissions occur into the second lactation. Once you get between 2.5 and 5 lactations, which is kind of where we live globally, we're on the flat part of that improvement line, hence the 6%, not 20 or 30 or 40%. And there's an admission here from this paper that increased milk production per cow is also good at reducing greenhouse gas emissions. No shit. This is what California has done over the last 50 years. They've gone from an average of 35 pounds of milk to an average of 88 pounds of milk. Pretty pathetic relative to Wisconsin. That's a good story. And you can see the decline in enteric methane here, 55%. Not 6%, people, 55%. So milk production is kind of important in this, and this has all occurred without changing herd turnover rate. It's pretty much the same. There's a fantastic EPA report. I'm not sure you can get it anymore, but here it is, 1990 to 2021 US greenhouse gas emissions. Good news, we've reduced them. Bad news, 2.3%. 2.3%. When we didn't travel anywhere in 2020, we made this little notch in transportation here. Transportation is 29% of US methane emissions. We emit 6,340 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents each year. Yes, it's down. How much is agriculture? This red line here, relatively flat, 9%. It's about 600 million metric tons. So agriculture, all of agriculture is 9%. Transport's 29, electrical power is 25, industry is 24%. So maybe there are some bigger fish to consider in the pond here. Yes, cattle are an important emitter of methane, and methane has a lot of high global warming potential. But if you look at dairy cattle are less than 2% of total US emissions. So now we start talking about reducing replacements on the farm and having a 6% impact on 2% of the total US emissions. And now we're into lots of decimal points, aren't we? Not really having perhaps the impact that we should be having, and it does make me scratch my chin a little bit. The last piece, paying off rearing costs. We hear that a lot. Cows have to get into their second or third lactation. These are some UK data, so bear that in mind. These are mixed house grazing herds, but the mean time to pay off was 530 days, about midway or just over the second lactation, so about 1.5 lactations on average to pay off. So certainly by the time you're in the third lactation, you're making money. So that's the good news. But man, is there a lot of herd variation in that kind of data. And who amongst us keeps really good records of heifer rearing costs? No, for sure. Again, to quote Mike, producing in excess of heifers is costly. But not having enough heifers is also costly. And I think most farmers like a little bit of a buffer. They always think about the worst, not the best. They want that insurance policy, and the thought that they would keep a low-producing cow just because they're driven to pay off her rearing costs when we could replace that cow doesn't seem to make an awful lot of sense. Culling models. Smarter people than I do this. They put all these mathematical models together looking at economic performance. And you can create a model where the optimal turnover rate is somewhere between 19 and 29% across a lot of different publications. And what they're doing is optimizing profit per some unit of limiting factor, usually space or quota or something else. And they're optimizing cash flow of a cow, comparing an incumbent versus a replacement. So they're determined by decision-making in terms of rearing costs, changes in cow performance over time, increasing milk production as cows get older, and the genetic progress through genomics and sex semen usage. So they're putting all these complex things into these models. And yes, you can create a model that Albert de Vries put together here that says the optimum is 20% or 5 lactations. This is a simple model. He calls it a simple model. I think it's quite complicated. But you see it's got calf value, age, cow cost, lack of maturity, herd replacement, genetics, and so on. But the problem with these models is they miss one thing. They don't have health risk in them. It's really hard to put health into these things because we generally have pretty bad records of health, so we don't even know how much bad health we have. The risk of not having enough heifers outweighs the potential of a lot of these models, and I think that's what farmers are seeing. Because when I look at data here comparing 2012 with 2022, so a 10-year period in AgSource DHI data, and I look at the performance of the herds, can focus on the 20th percentile, the 50th percentile. They've done so many amazing things, these herds, over that 10-year period. They've added 9 pounds of milk per cow. They've added 0.4 points of fat, 0.1 of protein. They've improved fertility. Preg rate's gone up 9 points. I'm at a repro meeting, yeah? You've had an impact. Cell count's gone down. Fresh cow health's improved. Turnover rate hasn't changed a damn. They've done all these amazing things, and they haven't changed turnover rate one bit, despite all of those wonderful models telling us that the optimum is somewhere around 20%. Our average herd still removes 36% of the cows. I can't fathom that these smart dairymen wouldn't adopt a model that makes sense to them if it made sense to them. Because they've done all these other amazing things. What's the barrier? I think from a dairy producer's perspective, it's just not that costly to have a few extra heifers. And they like the flexibility of having them, and they can replace an unproductive cow as and when they need it. So when you look at the statement of improved longevity, turns out that actually it doesn't reflect animal welfare particularly well. That you only have very modest impacts on greenhouse gas emissions, and they pale into comparison to increased milk production. And just heifer rearing costs are just not a big selling factor. So despite the models, farmers don't follow that plan, and turnover rates have largely stayed the same in the US. So why? Farmers manage breeding, not culling. It's real simple. I started off in the UK, and most of my dairymen did this. I'll start on the right-hand side here. Very common to get extra money from a beef calf. Sound familiar? Been that way for a much longer period of time in Europe. So you'd breed half the herd to a Holstein bull and half the herd to a beef bull. Assume that if you start with 100 cows, they don't all get pregnant. Only half of them are female. You get some losses during the rearing process, and you end up with about 18 heifers per 100 cows. That's an 18% turnover rate and about 5.5 lactations. That magic 5 average lactations per cow. Not so when I first came to the US. Everybody bred the herd to a Holstein bull. Everybody was up for a replacement. 95 cows pregnant. Half of them were female. Work through here, you end up with 37 heifers per 100 cows, 2.7 lactation. That's the European versus US difference. Nothing to do with the animal, everything to do with the breeding decision. Now, we've messed it up. Victor's in another room talking about that. Yeah, now you've heard, oh, I can make some more money out of the beef cross. Yeah, so we're doing that. And, oh, we can use sexed Holstein seed. So we're doing that. So now it gets rather more complicated, and the explosion here of the use of beef semen over the last 10 years is Now, just a seismic shift in our management profile. When we asked farmers how they're using conventional semen and sex semen, we've seen more sex semen in the younger animals, more conventional beef semen in the older animals. Makes sense. That's what they're doing. So very rough math, and it's more complicated than this because we're not including turnover rate here, but let's just assume 100% of the L1s get bred to Holstein sex semen. We split half and half the L2s and we go all the way 100% for the conventional beef semen, follow the same kind of math. We end up with about the same number of replacements, a little fewer than previously when we bred the whole herd to conventional Holstein semen. And we're at 3 or just under lactations, not 5. Because of the approach that we're taking to breeding management. Not culling management, just breeding management. We may have overdone it, folks. Yeah, that value of that beef calf, I think that's what's driving this decrease in the heifer population that we have, sparking interest in productive life and all these discussions. How fast is it going to fix? Are we going to fix this problem when heifers are $3,000 plus each? I think we'll be fixing it next year. So we're gonna go through the cycle, but we're probably going to go back to having a reasonable number of heifers available fairly shortly. So we surveyed some farmers about their thoughts on all this, and I'll show you some of the detail of that in a moment. But just to put this one up straight away, is when we asked them their response to cows living too short a life in the US, less than 3 lactations, 20% didn't believe it. 20% said that their dairy cows have a valid new career as a beef cow. 20% said it's a business, the economic piece of this. 16% that they liked avoiding age-related problems in older cows. But some admitted the environment might be too hard. A few agreed, and who said just cows work hard. Cow longevity is determined by breeding decisions and semen choice. Individual cow longevity is determined by health and performance. We've got to separate those two things in our minds. We should be holding our farms accountable to the quality of the cows leaving the herd, not the quantity. It's just a function of the program they're using. We've got some work to do here. If we look at slaughter populations in the US and around the world, we've got too many thin cows, too many cows with large udders, potentially with chronic mastitis, too many lame cows. 2 of the main diseases that I spend most of my time working with. So, with that basis, we try to ask the farmers, what are the challenges you're facing selecting cows for culling? And, how do you go about the process of that? Why are the cows leaving in the first place? So we surveyed 60 herds, typical turnover rate, typical death rate. It's Wisconsin, so most of them are on deep bedding, 3/8 milking, lots of milk, better than those California herds, and average about 1,400 cows. So what do you find most challenging about deciding when to cull a cow? Top answer, culling good cows with higher milk production. Some had no problem. Some were, dealing with just lack of space, forcing them to move cows out. Some of them had some disagreements amongst the management team about which cow should stay or go. This is interesting, trying to decide amongst themselves how sick is too sick. That's how sick a cow is before you put her on the truck. Very difficult for farmers to make that decision. Some rather nicely still have emotional connections to their cows, and some hated culling pregnant cows. So what would help the process? Good records, economic value. We said, well, there is a way of doing that. It's called cow value. And they said, oh, not that, too complicated. So they want economic value, but they don't want that pig screen where you have to make all those choices. Some genomics, some automated flagging systems, lifetime production data. So then we looked at culling reports. What kind of report do you pull out of dairy comp or your herd management software? What helps you make that decision? And they listed things like last test day milk, last daily milk, days open, whether it called them do not breeds, the last cell count, and then immediate health events, mainly lameness and mastitis. And what you get from that report is that's very immediate. It's very short term, isn't it? It's really very much a focus on what did you do for me lately, last test day. And I think that could probably lead to some bad decisions if we're not careful. Top 5 stated reasons for removing cows: low yield, lack of space, repro problems, disease, injury, not a surprise. This one is important. When they're asked about multiple reasons, if there are multiple reasons why a cow is leaving, how do you select the reason that you record? 54% said the most obvious reason for the cow leaving on that day, and 21% said the reason for the reason that they're leaving that day. If you insert the word production, it probably makes sense. So a lot of cows leave for low production, but 20% of herds are trying to work out why the cow is making low production. That's obviously going to have an impact on our records. So here we go. Wisconsin survey of those 60 herds, 46 of them were on dairy comp. And so we downloaded the last 4 years of culled cows, performance, health, and removal reasons. That's about 86,000 cows. You can see the age distribution there. We did have 15 cows in their 10th lactation, 1 in their 11th. So some cows do live quite a long time in this population. And what we did, or I say we, this is my grad student, Caitlin Budabar, she went through 86,000 records and went through the remark line of why the herd person had typed the reason for the cow leaving. A typed reason rather than the disposal code. We call it a DCAR code or disposal code. It's one of the numbers we use when we record why a cow leaves. And for interest, there was about a 25% disparity between the DCAR code and the typed reason. We're relying on the typed reason in this data going forward. I do like some of my favorite culling remarks here. Crazy, tag eater, evil bitch, old as F, retired, hot mess, legs ugly, stupid, and train wreck. So the advantage of dairy comp is its flexibility. The disadvantage of dairy comp is a grad student having to categorize these into a reasonable way that we can summarize. You can imagine how fun that was. Disposal codes in the US, quick aside, these are the classic standard 9. They live in dairy comp. Dairy comp is often used as an intermediary program to transport that information to DHI. So these are the standard DHI DCAR codes, 1 to 9. AgSource locally uses a different set of numbers, 21 to 29, and they try to match what's happening on the farm to these numbers. And if they can't, they default it to injury. Just bear with me on that one. The bad news is, say you could change everything in dairy comp? Well, you can change all these codes if you wish. And so number 2 could be low production or miscellaneous or dairy. Number 1 here could be dairy or metabolic diseases or pneumonia. You get the idea. There's a bit of a problem here getting these reasons transferred. So when I look at published data from DHI and Canada and other countries, and I see 25 to 30% of reasons classified as other, I know there's a lot of tag eaters in that group, and 14 to 27% classified as injury, I'm starting to think maybe the DCAR codes aren't terribly truthful in a lot of these instances. Looking at our data of looking at the typed reason, so somebody spent time putting it in there, production was number one, udder health, died, reproduction, illness, dairy, and lameness. So those were our main reasons for removal. Our herds had still a fairly high rate of dairy sales, 8.5% dairy sales within this population. So again, a little representative. People talk about secondary reasons. Oh, you have to type another reason after you selected one. Sometimes I think they can be useful. If you're wondering what the injuries are, they're hops. Okay, that's what's getting typed as an injury. If you're wondering what illness is, it's this is pneumonia and DAs. Those are the most common reasons. Not sure herds people know how to define pneumonia, so I remain a bit skeptical about that. It's a difficult diagnosis to make. If we categorize these reasons by herd turnover rate, the upper quartile, the high turnover rate herds, the most common reason there would be udder health. So we see more cows leaving for udder health in those high turnover rate herds. And in our lower turnover rate herds, we tend to see more repro culls, perhaps because we've got more choice. We see that in our moderate herds as well. Maybe that helps them improve fertility by weeding out those cows that aren't particularly fertile. If we look at it by milk production, the upper quartile by herd milk production, the main reasons the animals are leaving there are highest for repro culls. In our high producing herds, somewhat makes sense, and you can see that kind of increases with increasing milk production. Go down the other end in our low producing herds, main reason cows are leaving, udder health. You kind of see that goes in the opposite direction. So big impact, I think, of udder health in those low producing herds. You guys interested in repro? Very good at getting cows pregnant. Try not to get all the cold cows pregnant, will you? Okay. 26% of our cows leaving our herds are pregnant. Huge economic wastage. Maybe we could select these cows a little earlier before we synchronize them. We look at lifetime health events amongst production, repro, and other health culls. There's an awful lot of ill health amongst that population. You look at production culls, 46% of them had at least one health event in the last lactation, and that was most commonly mastitis. So a lot of health driving issues here. So what is a production cull? Well, down in this quadrant, we have cows that have a lower ME in the lower half of ME in their herd and a lower current milk, lower half in their herd. So those look like fairly true production related culls, and you can kind of see what they look like. But then you come over here, and I don't know what these are. These are production culls that are leaving the herd, 29% of production culls, and they're better than half of the cows in their own herds, both in terms of ME and current milk. So maybe a bit of misclassification going on here. This is the one that we kind of see a lot, low ME, high current milk. So they're still doing quite well in current milk, but they've been kind of preordained. They've been looking at MEs. They leave the herd. They're generally the older cows. They're age-related culls. And then we've got high ME and low current milk. 23% of production culls are up here. And I look at this health events, average of 3 health events in the last lactation in that population. I look at those as likely health-related production cows. These are good cows. They were just recently low in production, perhaps likely due to a health event. So production culls, what is the point of recording a production cull? Good point. 29% are pregnant, 29% are probably true, have lower herd and current milk production compared to the average cows in their herd, but probably a quarter of them are actually health culls. That's why they have low production in the first place. Maybe some are just older planned culls, and 29% are flat out wrong. We're actually removing good cows in that production area. These are not voluntary culls. Okay, so let's slay that terminology. I want you all to leave and never use voluntary and involuntary again. It's utterly useless. Okay, voluntary is supposed to be the dairy sales and the poor milk producers. We've kind of proved that's a very small population. Involuntary due to disease. Well, a lot of the production is due to disease as well. So I find it rather useless. John Fetro suggested economic versus forced. I see the logic of it. I've never seen a herd use it. So that's probably not the way we're going to go either. We are clearly underestimating the impact of health on removal risk. We're talking perhaps of the wrong thing. We're talking about lifespan, longevity, productive life, which is the total duration of time that a cow lives, which should be driven by profitability. And perhaps we shouldn't focus so much on that, but focus on health span. We're focused on health span right now in the human population, of optimizing our health span, the period of time when we're free of illness and chronic conditions. And I think perhaps we should be talking about that in our dairy cow population, of optimizing health span to a point where health span equals lifespan, because that would mean that we ultimately have the choice of when to get rid of the cow from our herd and replace her with the next cow. So in summary, to wrap things up, US dairy farmers have been steadfastly consistent with their turnover rate. They continue to remove around 36, it may have dropped a little bit most recently in the last couple of years, but around a third of the herd each year, despite the models, despite many seminars and meetings talking about lower turnover rates. The process of culling is enormously variable. Just asking those questions of 60 farmers, what I thought I knew about the process, I realized they didn't know anything about it. The process is complicated. Few farms use relatively well-organized, high-quality summaries of data to help them select cows early enough in lactation to decide which cow leaves and when. There's an over-reliance on yesterday, of what did you do for me recently? And I think that perhaps leads to some mistakes in choosing the cows that we remove from the herd. They're basically culling one cow at a time. That's what the majority of our dairy producers are doing. They have a heifer, they have a slot, they're just making that decision that day without a lot of prior planning. And I wish we could change that. I think there are some ideas that we've got to do that. Health is a lot to do with culling reasons, even production culls. And I think going forward, we need to start talking about the health span of our dairy cows and the individual cow longevity rather than that of the herd. So thank you. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Question? So as a dairy industry, is there a way we can push improvement of records and like having like a more standardized coding for, can we push?
Can we? So the question is, can we?
Should we?
Yeah. So do I need to be here or?
No.
Okay. Can we as an industry get farmers to record better reasons for why cows leave? Yes, we've failed for about 50 years, so there's a question mark as to our abilities. What I was impressed with the herds that we had was there were some really good health records, and they all make sense. The other health culls had lots more mastitis, the lame culls had lameness, so they were recording health, and they're taking the time to type all these letters into a remark to say why a cow is leaving. So there's clearly, within this population at least, there's a desire for the herd to record information. I think we're doing a terrible job of using it. And ultimately, when it goes into DHI records and we rely on DCAR codes, that seems to be a broken system as far as I'm concerned. So that needs help fixing. But there's clearly a desire for the farmers to get useful information back. So I think there's hope, but doing what we're doing right now doesn't work very well. Any other questions? Fine.
Couple of comments with your plan of going to Europe. First, on the greenhouse gas deal, one of the things I get pretty wrapped around the axle about is people talking about fewer heifers to be better. That's because they ignore the contribution of dairy beef into the beef that food supply.
Right.
I think that's a critical point to understand.
Yeah.
You cited Albert's work in 2020 showing roughly 20%
That's right,
off
yeah.
replacement. I would recommend talking to Albert before you go, because the last 2 years he's redone that. When he considers health and true economic opportunity costs.
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of conversations around this.
He published that, I can't find it.
He presented it at AVP, I think, in another meeting, but he's up closer into the mid-30s in terms of optimal
So when you factor in risk and health and things.
health risk and opportunity costs of keeping animals too long.
Yeah.
Which is something we've talked a lot about. That's a big.
Cool. Time to publish it. Any other questions?
I want to guess,
Yeah.
going like more like, with the introduction of activity systems, how do you see that changing a little bit, the dynamics of pooling? Do you think that impacts at all?
Activity systems
Or
for,
just like health events and like,
I think they're really good at defining when a cow's dead. So they pick up those quite well. I don't think they're of great use in terms of culling. I'd struggle with that. Of all the systems we have out there, rumination seems to be the key for health. Lameness is so complex in terms of the way it impacts activity. We've now moved to AI and looking at video of animal movement to pick up some of those things. I think that's a better way to go than activity as such. So I'm not a great fan of just looking purely at activity for things. I think rumination, yes. I think looking at visual, is the cow thin, is the cow lame? We can do that with these artificial intelligence programs now. That I'm more excited about. Just not sure how you make money out of it. Right at the back.
So, I have a lot of producers that are trying to weigh the dilemma of, I've got a 6-month pregnant cow that I need to call, but she's got a $1,400 ticket in her uterus, and if I just get that out, are you seeing that skewing the reasons for culling in the data that you're looking at? Because I'm seeing a lot of big commercial dairies trying to balance that.
Yeah. Question is, do the farmers basically try to hang on to cows because they're pregnant? Man, if they are, they're still getting rid of a quarter of them, that are pregnant when they're removed from the herd. Production culls, some of those quadrants were like 40% were pregnant. So if they are hanging on, that's a little scary because that means the proportion is even greater than that. There's obviously some of that. I don't know that it's a major factor.
But when was your data taken?
When was the data taken? Last year.
Okay, so last year we didn't see the expression yet.
Last year, what?
Last year. Yeah, those were-
Oh, yeah. Okay.
When they started getting over $1,000 for a beef cross
Yeah.
calf.
Yeah.
That's when it started saying, hey, wait, maybe we should hold on to these cow cows. And now it's even more.
Yeah.
So it's something that's I think is gonna show in the data.
Yeah. Well, I'll invite you two back. You can look at the data from this year and you can go through the 85,000 culling reasons for me. We'll see.
Algorithm.
Oh yeah, we'll build an algorithm. Yeah, there's always a timing factor. We've actually got another data set where we're going to look at cull price, heifer price, and milk price, and see what impact that has.
Any other
All right?
questions?
So you seem to be advocating for a more organized approach to culling
Yeah.
overall.
Mhm.
What does that look like just on the surface?
That looks like trying to find an algorithm that tells me that a cow has a low percentage chance of calving again before you put zinc hormones into it. So basically early DNB in cow, because we know we cull DNB cows. Even though some of the DNB cows were pregnant, that's another story. But trying to make an early decision on a cow to say this cow has a relatively low survival chance into the next lactation. So make that decision, don't get her pregnant, and then for the farm to manage that cow optimally to say when during that lactation she leaves.
What's the optimal time in your mind to make that decision?
Good question. That's part of what we're looking at. Whether you can or not, I don't know. Whether we have enough information. Again, a lot of our culling is based on health events. It's health oriented, particularly lameness and mastitis.
What would you need the sensitivity and the specificity of that algorithm to be to get adoption?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be like 90%. I think somewhere in the 70 to 80% would give us enough. I'm not saying every single cull cow should be DNB early in lactation, but always be animals. Things happen to them later on that we have to select. But a significant proportion of cattle, if we're able to sort of identify those and say, okay, let's just move on. In beef herds, we'll move on from cows just for age purposes, because all of the health events just exponentially increase in the 10th calving or whatever, where I used to do it. You just prospectively went in and said, okay, let's get rid of this cow at the end of lactation. That's kind of a philosophy, whether we're proven right or wrong. But it doesn't need to be 90%.
You're saying even making a decision before she calves, like at the end of the lactation?
I would say our experiences with transition cow index, all of the information you have about a cow up to and including first test. That's kind of what we're doing. Which is before you sink her. That's kind of the idea. Before you make that commitment to breed.
Does that include looking at heifers that maybe have had 3 or more counts of pneumonia that would potentially never reach the maximum potential off maybe genomic data, or combined with health performance as a younger calf?
So the question is more health events related to pneumonia and then being related to low production later on.
Selecting to even breed those heifers if they've had significant health issues, but maybe haven't culled themselves out
Yeah.
by the time they get to breeding age.
I'm not sure this data would help us answer that question, but other data, yes, those cattle that have had pneumonia early on in life, they seem to have lower production and they're coming in first lactation. Not sure I can get at that with this, but you're right.
I actually looked at that several years ago for Dairy Science.
Okay.
And it was not a clear picture.
Yeah.
That's why I thought,
I think
it depends on the herd, depends on how aggressively they're actually removing heifers enough.
well, I'll quote myself quoting Dr. Olivet, if you haven't used lung ultrasound to define pneumonia, you don't know. So a lot of the health events and a lot of the pneumonia reasons, a bit skeptical, because it's such a difficult disease to define, even for a veterinarian with a stethoscope. Yeah, unless you got an ultrasound machine in your hand, you can't really tell. Calves or cows.
Any final questions? Thank you.
Break time.
Yeah.
Thank you.